Elliot married her first sweetheart and suffered abuse in every form. After leaving the marriage, she became broke, homeless, and even got arrested with the charge of stealing her own child. Bella's journey is a nightmare for any woman, but through forgiveness and God's grace, Bella has truly become the victor.
I think I've made a mistake. I don't want to be married anymore. This guy beats me black and blue. I felt really ugly. I had seasons of suicidal thoughts. I can do all things through Christ. Yes, I found myself in the UK, just an amazing time to let my hair down and live apparently with no rules. I gained new friends, but suddenly, as within a couple of years of me transitioning into the UK, my father passed away. And so this was, again, another tragic experience in my life. I remember the range of emotions I went through because I had felt like I was strategically positioned like Esther in the Bible when I went to the UK, and I knew that I needed to do my family proud and I needed to impact my generation and the values within which I grew up. But all of a sudden, my father, at such a young age, had gone. It was very unsettling. And at the time, I had met someone I was dating. I remember on the day when I buried my father, I called him and I said I couldn't bear to lose another man in my life. So when do we get married?
Due to the death of her father, Bella felt she needed to fill in that void with marriage.
It was a very strange relationship because I didn't meet any of his family members, of his biological family members. So that in itself was a problem. But when my father died, we hastily started to put plans together. He told me that he had no money to buy an engagement ring, so I loaned him my engagement ring money. This guy, for me, was a good friend. He was someone who I felt was my best friend at the time. I shared all my secrets with him.
From the early stages, there were signs that the marriage would be a big mistake.
I remember there was an occasion where I wasn't well, and he came home and cooked me some soup. It was just very beautiful. And so naturally, I fell in love with the person who I thought he was, rather than the person who he actually was. So as time unfolded, again he came up with, I have no money. So I had to plan my wedding and pay for it myself, literally. As the wedding preparations played out, not a single relative of his showed up and took part. There was no representation from his family. So I ended up showing up at the wedding with all my family and his friends and himself, and he showed up for the wedding. Within 3 months of us getting married, I came home from work one day. He was not working, and he said to me, I need to talk to you. So I sat down and thought, what's this about? He then said, I think I've made a mistake. I don't want to be married anymore. I just talked him into staying.
The first physical abuse encounter with her husband transpired through a disagreement over the remote control.
There was one incident where he had asked me to watch a show on my TV in my apartment. I had told him that I preferred watching my own recorded program. So I then said, okay, I was going to go into the kitchen and cook alternatively, and since my program was recorded, I'll settle to watch it later. And somehow I was in the kitchen playing a Tina Turner song, I Will Survive, and he just went into a rage then and broke everything in my apartment. So then I thought to myself, why? In fact, he stormed out, ended the relationship, sulked, and I went over to him the following day and I thought, what happened? At least explain to me where you were coming from and help me understand what is it? So he felt I was hinting at him. He took my song that was coming out of a radio very personally, and we made up. And so fast forward to when we were married, and 6 months after the wedding, this guy beats me black and blue, and again went into a rage, breaking things in the apartment that we lived.
After the incident, she believed him when he gave the excuse that it was the devil who pushed him to do it. They both agreed to keep it a secret.
Almost every argument descended into a slap or into some sort of physical abuse, and tears and apology and makeup sex, and that was the cycle. And I was deeply unhappy.
Bella's husband not only abused her physically, but also verbally and emotionally.
As the marriage progressed and as it became a complete shambles, I felt, I fasted, I prayed, I learned that whatever we speak will come to pass. So I made declarations, and little did I understand that we cannot really manipulate another human's destiny. I then purposed that maybe what might fix this is to have a baby. So I came off the pill and I decided to conceive a child against his wishes.
Falling pregnant was the biggest mistake Bella did, according to her husband.
I remember switching the heating on because it was really cold, because it gets really cold in the winter months. And he said, "Oh, I'm feeling very hot." And then I said, "No, but I have to bathe the baby. And in order for me to bath the baby, I need to get the heating on." And we switched it on and switched it off, and we were fighting over the dial. And all of a sudden, he just slapped me. I fell over, and it descended into another physical tirade. And he was really enraged in that episode. So he took a table and hit my foot and broke the table on my foot, and I broke a metatarsal, a bone in my foot. So when I stood up, I realized I couldn't put the weight of my body on my foot, and my feet began to swell up really quickly. So he panicked, and he went out, got an ambulance, went out, called the neighbors and said, "Oh, she's just fallen down. She had a bad fall." So he had this story made up.
The physical abuse was so bad that Bella often found herself admitted into hospital.
So I went to the pastor of the church we were attending at the time, and I sought counseling. And in the counseling sessions, he said, "You know what? I never loved her. She's got to go. I don't want to have this marriage."
Even a marriage counselor at the church could not save the marriage.
And when he was really determined to end the marriage, we had an apartment issued to us by a housing association. So he basically went to the housing association and said to them that we're done with the apartment. We really don't want to live here anymore. We've got alternative arrangements. We're going. And he came home and said, the housing people are taking the apartment back on Tuesday. So this was like a Thursday. And that was the end of it. I was homeless with a 7-month-old baby. So I called a girlfriend of mine who lived in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I said to her, "I really need somewhere to live. So please help me out." In my friend's house, I had seasons of suicidal thoughts. I had seasons where I didn't know what day it was at times. I didn't know whether it was a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. I would wake up and I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't comb my hair. I didn't look after myself. And she practically helped me with feeding my own child and looking after my child because I was just a hot mess.
Things got so bad that all she thought about was dying.
When we were separated, we were still legally married. And so he would still come and have sex with me because he demanded his conjugal rights and that I was still his wife. I remember consulting with a pastor who thought, "Yeah, you're still his wife really legally. I mean, so what's the big deal?" And so to add insult to injury, I felt like a prostitute because he was purely using my body for his good. And on one occasion, I had a sexually transmitted disease. So one day, I went to the chemist and I purchased some sleeping tablets. And I decided that because my son was the reason why I didn't want to kill myself without him, that I would infuse the sleeping tablets into his milk and I'd give him to drink. And when he's gone, when I could no longer feel a pulse, then I would drink myself. So on that Saturday morning, my pastor phoned me very, very early at about 6 a.m. and said I had woken up in the middle of the night in great torment and you were on my spirit. And I went into intercession concerning your life for about 3 hours. And he prophetically began to speak to me about my destiny and said to me that what the devil was trying to get you to do is not the plan of God.
After the call from the pastor, she knew she needed Jesus and needed to get her life back on track.
I fell down while he was talking and been in worship for 6 hours, and this was just a miracle because the phone didn't ring, I didn't need to use the bathroom, and I laid on the floor and I really cried out to God and I said, Lord, if I am going to have to make it, I really can't do church, I need Jesus. And after 6 hours, I just felt something come out of my belly, and I was sort of infilled with the Holy Ghost because I felt like a bubbling in my spirit. I began to speak with a new tongue. And I just had such a powerful encounter with God. In that moment, and from that day to today, 19 years on, I have never had a suicidal thought. I remember looking at the mirror thinking, gosh, I've lost so much weight and nobody told me. And I had a conversation with myself and I said, I'm going to live and not die. And I will declare the glory of God. And I resolved to be my best self. I said I was not only going to live, I was not going to exist, I was going to live, and I was going to live my best life. I knew in that moment that Jesus was my helper, that he was all that I would ever need. And there was such a revelation in that encounter for me.
The whole experience changed her life, and she became someone new.
I got up from that experience a renewed woman. I got up from that experience a healed woman. I got up from that experience changed in my perspective, knowing that I was not just a result of my mom and dad coming together, but I was purposed to live. You're being arrested and everything you say or do might be used against you in a court of law, so they read me my rights. So this in itself opened up new wounds because I had to revisit my past. Coincidentally, after years, I bumped into my ex-husband. I can do all things through Christ. And when people look at me now, it's hard for them to believe where I've come from. At this point in time, I found myself very empowered to do life. I purposed that I was going to live my best life, and what a sense of relief that was. I still had a child to raise. I still had a job to do. I still had a life to live. I remember going to the estate's agent to look for a place to live as my first step of being on my own. And when I arrived at the estate's agent, he took one look at me and said, have you ever owned your own home? And I said, no. I said, I'm actually wanting to rent a room. I don't want to even have an apartment. I don't think I could afford. So he looked at my finances and he said, I could help you. I could help you buy your own home. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. He helped me with budgeting properly and living within my means and saving. I began to look for a home, and I found a nice little place where my son and I would settle. I found a little 2-bedroom cottage, and he helped me work the finances in order for me to get a mortgage to live there. So things began to look up.
Just as things began to look up, she had to revisit her past through her divorce proceedings.
So this in itself opened up new wounds because I had to revisit my past. My ex-husband at the time began to suggest to the court that I was mentally deranged, and that a lot of the things I claimed, because there was never really a formal police report or anything, were just figments of my imagination, and that the abuse never happened. And so I just settled to end the divorce as quickly as I could. We had to kick off custody proceedings. So again, it was just traumatic for me to go through all of that with the same person. I then decided that I'd had enough after the divorce was finalized, and that I was going to go to America to make a fresh start and just have a break and leave. I phoned an uncle of mine up and went into the US, moved into the US to live with them. For me, it was a good time to get away from all the stress of life in the UK. It was a good time to just get my head away from all the stress that I'd encountered and and the trauma of the past. So I settled my son into school in the US, and I began to look for work. I had restrictions with my immigration status in being able to legally work there. But supernaturally, God made provision because I had had savings, I'd had things, money put aside and so on.
On a trip to Canada, Bella was faced with an ugly surprise at the border.
We were asked to disembark the cars, and all of a sudden, when my passport was presented at the immigration officers began to speak on their mic, the walkie-talkies, and said, "We've got her, we've nailed her, we've found her." So I was wondering, I didn't even know that anybody was looking for me. So the officer said to me that you're being arrested and everything you say or do might be used against you in a court of law. So they read me my rights. So I was arrested for child kidnapping. Apparently, my ex-husband had filed a legal report that I had disappeared with his child. He didn't know where I was, and he was desperate to have a relationship with his child. So I was arrested and locked up in a cell. And I was told that my child would be taken into foster care. I protested. I pretended I was crazy, that if anyone would take my child from me, that would be the end of, that I would burn the place down. I just went wild. And so they left my son with me in the cell, and my cousin with whom I was driving surrendered himself to be locked up with me. So we were all in the cell overnight. So we called the British High Commissioner, and she came on the phone and she said, "What's going on?" And I said, "These people have arrested me for child kidnapping, and obviously I didn't kidnap my child. My ex-husband knew I was coming." So she said, "Don't say anything." So within 2 hours, a lawyer arrived at the scene. He took my statement and asked that I be removed from the cell into house arrest because of the minor, because of the child I had with me. So I was taken from Minnesota to another state called North Dakota, where I was under house arrest, and I had about 6 or 7 armed police officers with me. So the lawyer negotiated for me to go and face charges in London because that was where the case was filed. So arrangements were made, and I was told I was going to be kept in house arrest until such time when an airline would happily, freely fly me back to the UK. So I was there for a few days. I called, and I was entitled to 1 phone call a day. I called my uncle, and he came up to the border to meet me. And he got a cousin of mine to buy us an air ticket because I just wanted to come out, to buy us an air ticket to get us back to the UK. I got to the UK. I was escorted by armed guards onto the plane. It was so embarrassing. I couldn't quantify it with words. So I was escorted back onto the plane. I was escorted, and when I landed in England, there was a police officer on the plane to take me off. So when the police officer they took me into a room at the airport, and he said to me, "The Queen welcomes you home. What's going on?"
On arrival to the UK, Bella was sent straight to court to be trialed.
So I went to court, and I saw my ex-husband sat there with a big smirk on his face. And the judge asked me what had happened. I gave my side of the story. He came in with a band of lawyers. And my saving grace was that while we were in the US for the whole year we were there, we kept sending emails back and forth. So I used to tell him, this is what my son was doing, this is where he's schooling, this is what is happening. So obviously he knew where we were, he had had communication with us. So the case was kicked out of court. And the judge said to me, "You're free to go back to the US." So now I was based again in the UK, but this time I was unemployed. I had no job, and I still had a child to look after. God just began to open miraculous doors in the area of work. So one day I was driving on a road called the North Circular, which is an orbital highway in London. And a lorry came in on my far side and crashed my car against the central reservation, which is like the midrib of the motorway. So they got me out of the car and into hospital. I was in such deep shock that I lost my speech for 2 weeks. And every time I tried to sleep, I had flashbacks of the accident. I realized that even though I had it had been many years since I was divorced, I was still carrying the shame. I realized I was insecure.
After all these events, Bella knew she had to let go of the past and forgive if she truly wanted to be healed.
I was able to find release in all the people that offended me. I remember it was such an amazing experience because I just began to remember people from years and years and years before that had offended me, and I began to call them by name, people who I'd forgotten about. And all of a sudden it began to come to me, oh, I call this person, and God, for that thing that happened where I felt like this, I forgive them and I release them. And I even began to identify the different events that happened in my marriage, and I released forgiveness toward my ex-husband. And it was interesting. Coincidentally, after years, I bumped into my ex-husband. And what had happened in times past when I would see him is that this anger would rise up within me. But all of a sudden, when I saw him after this whole forgiveness episode, all I felt was sympathy for his soul. You know, I walked up to him and I said hello, and this really knocked him for six, you know. I walked up to him and I said hi. I said, how are you? I hope you're well. He couldn't answer the questions because he was really, really shocked. And truly, in that moment, heaven and earth were able to bear witness to me that I had no grudge in my heart toward him. I have been through a divorce. I have been through imprisonment. I have been through debt. I have been through all of these things, you know, homelessness, being a single parent, and all that comes with that. And truly now I can live my best life. Truly now I'm in a place where I can do all things through Christ. I have been charged with empowering people to live their best lives. I am in a place where I'm giving back, and my life has blossomed. And when people look at me now, it's hard for them to believe where I've come from. God supernaturally opened doors. I moved away from where I initially had that 2-bedroom cottage to one of the most affluent neighborhoods in London. And it is simply the grace of God. It is simply the hand of God that has moved so supernaturally in my life that has enabled me and empowered me to do all that I'm doing now.
Just as you know, every worthy cause needs support. And Dominion TV has been doing this for some time now, Christian-based television that seeks to power the youth with the message of Christ, take over the whole of Africa. And I believe this is a worthy cause. So if you want to support financially, or you're a brand and want to get on board, just visit the website www.dominiontv.net, or you can contact the numbers on the screen. Thank you.